Now,
Yeah,
my grandfather, I don't know where he come from, but my grandmother was from Ireland, and she was a twin, and one of them was born on the ship as they come over, and they made, her mother then made it to the land before the other one was born, so I don't know which one was which, but grandma was born on the ship or what.
Now, does your grandfather, you say you don't remember, of course you don't remember, and you want her to tell, what did he look like? You know what he looked like?
Well, he was a tall man and slim, and he had jet black hair. I remember that, and also wore a mustache. And he was sickly for a long time. He was sick.
How long did he live? How old was he?
Well, he raised 11 kids, and they was all grown when he died. They was all married but the baby, and that was my uncle.
Do you figure he's in his 60s?
I'd say he was in his 60s.
And then
Late 50s or early 60s.
Then your grandmother, what was her name?
Amanda.
Last name?
Carter. Amanda Carter.
Now, do you know what your grandmother's mother's name was?
Yeah, her name was Elizabeth.
Last name?
No, I don't know what her maiden name was. But her last name was Elizabeth. Or her first name was Elizabeth.
Okay, and your grandmother, how old did your grandmother Carter live to be?
Well, Grandma was, I'd say she was close to her 70s when she died.
And you don't know what she died of?
She had a stroke. I think that's probably when she had her second stroke.
Do you remember anything about her?
Yeah, she was a short, red-headed woman, little bitty thing. You think I'm small, but she was a little larger.
Figured that she might have been under 5 foot.
Yeah.
How tall are you?
I'm 5'11".
4'11"?
No, I'm 5.
5 foot.
5'8".
So she was under 5 foot.
Mm-hmm. And she was always a little woman. And she's kind of spunky.
Okay. How about now? Let's go to your father first.
Oh, my daddy, I don't know too much about his family because he never would talk about them.
His name?
His name was Strother.
What was it?
Strother.
Strother?
Strother Thompson. And his daddy's name was Jesse Thompson. And his mother was Jennifer Chapman. His mother was. So when you went to call Jennifer, I said, well, I'm not going to say anything till they name her. And then I knew they had my grandmother's name, Jennifer. But we always called her Jenny. And she died when my daddy was 7 years old.
Now, what'd your daddy look like?
He was a short man. He wasn't very tall at all, and he never was very big. He weighed about 150 pounds, maybe the most. But he was short, and when he was young, he was real black-headed. But he said when he was young, when he was a child, he always had blonde hair, and it turned black. But I always remembered him with jet black hair. And he didn't get very gray, just a little bit gray here and yonder in it.
Now, how old was he when he died?
Well, he was close to 80 when he died. He's only been dead now about 32 years. And he was around 80 when he was, I don't know how much under 80, but he was right around 80 when he died.
When he had a stroke?
No, he had cancer of the bladder. And so he wasn't sick too long.
All right, your mother.
And mother died with kidney trouble.
How old was she?
She was 69 years old. She would have been 70 in November, but she died in April.
And what'd she look like?
She was a slim woman, but she was taller than I am. But she was always so skinny, slim, just like her daddy.
What color hair?
She had jet black hair and big brown eyes. And she never grayed much till her last few years. And then she grayed, got a little bit gray. But her hair was still dark when she died. But
What did, how many kids, how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Mom had 10 kids. She raised 7 of us to be grown, and she lost 3. 2 babies, and one was 9 years old when she died. My sister yesterday would have been her birthday. And the other 2, one was born in April, and he lived about 15 months. The other one was born in January. And I think Mom said he was 19 months old when he died.
So what you got 7 brothers and sisters. What's the breakdown? Brothers and sisters.
Now,
Yeah.
I got 1 sister and 2 brothers.
Well, originally I'm talking about when you had 7. You had how many? What was? You had.
She had 4 daughters.
4. So you had there was 3 sisters and yourself.
Yeah.
And then 3 brothers. Where were you at in the relationship to age? In the middle, or front, or back?
Well, I got 4 sister and 3 brothers younger than me.
And so you're the oldest.
Mm-hmm. See, she had Jesse, my oldest brother, and Ethel, my oldest sister. They was 2 of the oldest ones. Well, she had these 3 to die.
Yeah.
They were between Ethel and me. And so they was 11 years between Ethel and me. And
after you, then there were 6.
no, there was 4 younger than me. And I had 1 sister younger and 3 brothers younger.
Now, how did you go along with your brothers and sisters?
Well, I got along good with them. Mother always told me that I raised them because I was the oldest. Well, Geraldine is 4 years younger than me. And Mom had set me down, and I'd take care of her. Mom worked in the garden. And she'd set me down, and I'd take care of Geraldine. And then whenever James and John come along, those 2 of the youngest ones, she'd go to the cornfield, hoe corn, take a blanket and food for me to feed them, and I took care of them till they got to walking and getting around. Well, I took care of them all the time when they was young. And she used to tell me when she was working that I raised them too.
And you say she worked with on a farm, or?
Yeah, on the fields and
She go to corn. When you say she went to hoe corn,
mm-hmm.
what she did? What was that?
You see, back in the hills, you can't use tractors or anything back there. Well, if you farm, you've got to farm on the hillside. And she'd take a hoe and go to the hill and hoe corn. But she'd find her a flat spot, and she'd set me down with them babies. And I'd sit there and take care of them while she hoed corn, her and my oldest sister. My oldest sister's 11 years older than I am, and she died she died just after James Keith was born.
And how many brothers and sisters you got living now?
I got 2 brothers and 1 sister. 11.
Now you had, so you took care of the kids pretty much when you were growing up.
Yeah.
But now you didn't get to grow up very long.
No. I married when I was 15 years old.
All right. Now when you got, when did you start seeing? When did you start seeing Simon, or when did you see Simon?
Well,
How old were you?
I was about 9 years old, and we moved from Shelbyana, Kentucky, to Chatteroy, West Virginia. And we lived in a mining camp. And he had to carry water past our house. And back that time, his hair was as white as cotton. And Mom asked me whenever he'd come along, going after water, he had to pass our house, I'd go with him and carry water back to, he'd pump the water. And but there was the older girl that went along with us and pumped the water. He'd pump the water. Mom didn't know him. So she said one day, she said, "Who is that little white-headed boy that goes up past here?" And I told her, I said, "That's Preacher Mullett's boy, Simon." And Ethel, my oldest sister, she was home then. She had about 6 months before she married. And she said, "Leave it up to Martha, she'll tell you." And so we played together. We moved out the next house into Preacher Mullet. And we played together.
What was the name of the town? What town was that?
Chatteroy, West Virginia. But it was in Goodman Camp. We also called it Goodman. But the address was Chatteroy. And
you lived there. Now, what'd your dad do? What kind of
he
job?
was a coal miner.
Oh, so, okay, he was a coal miner. And your mother would work sometimes farm in the field.
Yeah, she'd raise her garden and work in cornfields.
All right, when you say work in the cornfield, was that somebody else's cornfield? Or
No,
was that
it
hers?
was ours.
Okay, so she worked the field. She was in her own cornfield.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you were growing up, your brothers and sisters, can you remember? You know, you say you didn't fight most of the time. You just took care of them.
No, we didn't fight. Me and my oldest brother. Now we'd fight. He was about 13 years older than I am, or 14, something like that. He thought he ought to whip me. And my oldest sister married before I was 10 years old. She got married. She run off my home and got married. And I thought, well, he ought to take over and he ought to whip me. But if I could get a hold of me a butcher knife or a hatchet, I had him whipped, I could stand him off. And he'd holler, "Mom, come and take this away from her." Mom said, "You started it, you let her go." But if I didn't get a hold of me a butcher knife or a hatchet, I was whipped. He could whip me. And
Now, how long did you stay in school?
I went to the 4th grade. My mother got sick and I had to quit school and take care of the kids and the family.
That's kind of what everybody did when they
Yeah.
something happened. You had to quit school,
Mhm.
right?
And then we moved 2 miles up a holler. Had to walk 2 miles out of that holler to school. So when there was snow fell, big deep snows, we didn't get to go. And I didn't get to go on until 4th grade.
All right. So this blonde-headed guy who was next, he lived fairly close to you. Was that the only guy? Is that the only boy that you were kind of interested in?
No, like different dates. But last time he stepped in, it was about 4 months before we got married. I'd pass his house going to church, and I'd have a boyfriend and walk along with me to church. And he said all that time he'd see me passing going to church with somebody else, it'd make him mad. Well, one night I didn't have no boyfriend. And he stepped in and asked me, could he walk me home? And I told him, yeah. Well, he never let go from then on.
So he walked you home from what, church?
Church. See, his daddy was pastor of the church and we'd pass our house going to church.
So back then, a date or kind of a date was just walking with somebody.
Yeah, or make a date and he'd come to the house. And his nights to come to my house was Wednesday night and Friday night. And that's the nights that he'd come to my house. And I'd go to church on Saturdays and Sundays. Saturday night and Sundays, we'd go to church.
So when he came to your house, what did you do when he came to the house?
We would usually sit in the swing, on the front porch, in the swing. And if it was night, we sit in the house. Because my daddy was strict. And we always had to use the front room and be where they know where we were at.
So how long did you do this where he was taking you to church before he asked you to marry and going to?
We started dating in July. I think it's on towards the 1st of July. And then it was getting pretty close to just about November. Last of October. We started planning to get married.
And how old were you?
I was 15.
How old was Simon?
He was 19 in October, and we got married in November.
All right, so when you got married, where did you live then?
We stayed 1 month with Preacher Mullett, his daddy. And then we moved out a mile from anybody up on a hill in a log house at the mouth of an old coal mine tunnel. We called it number 5 tunnel. And then somebody built a house up there. And we moved back there and we stayed there till about 2 months before Helen was born. And they wanted me to move up there because the doctor wouldn't go up
Now,
there.
did Simon's dad marry you?
Yeah. He married us.
He married you and then you moved into his house, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I bet that was fun, huh?
Oh, was it? And they were as bad as my daddy, strict. But when we moved out, 1 month, we was married 1 month, moved out.
And when you moved in the house, what was Simon doing there?
He was working on what they call WPA. And he worked about 2 or 3 days a week. But we got along good on it. And then
That was in 19 what?
34.
1934.
And then 1935 he worked there too.
And that's when Helen came along.
Mm-hmm. And she was 14 months old to a day when Shelby Jean was born.
Now, you talked to you guys to decide how many kids you were going to have?
No, I didn't want any after Helen was born. I said, oh no, that's enough. But
Well, this house that you moved into when you were first married, what kind of a house would that look like?
well, it was a 1-room log house. Had another room on the side, and it wasn't finished. We were talking last night, or night before last. It was the happiest time of our lives. We were back there, and he'd go to work, and I'd stay back there and work around the house. And we just had a good time back in there. 1 mile from anybody.
Well, what do you, for prosperity purposes here, there was no water, right?
Oh, we had plenty of water.
I mean, there wasn't water in the house.
No.
You had to get the water outside the house,
Yeah.
and the toilet was outside the
Yeah.
house. There was no electricity.
No.
For lights, you used
Coal.
coal oil and burnt on lanterns, and you heated the house with what?
Coal.
Coal. Okay. You had a coal burning stove.
We had a big fireplace, big open fireplace.
So you just burnt the coal in the fireplace.
Mm-hmm. But it was happy. We were happy and we got along good.
Right. So you went when he would come home, you'd fix a meal for him. How did you go about doing that? So you had to go out and get water. Kind of explain how you did that.
I had water buckets. I'd go out there and get my water and carry it in the house. And I'd cook on a cook stove, a coal cook stove.
Okay. When you say a coal cook stove, what is that?
Well, it's just a big stove. Had a warming closet up over it, built a fire down there in it. You could keep your food warm up in that, what we call a warming closet. And I cooked on that stove. It had 4 caps on it.
And the fire burn under the stove and heat the.
And had a oven back in there. It he baked the bread. And I'd do the cooking and have everything ready when he come in.
When you're using a coal stove, couldn't regulate the heat in the oven though, right?
No,
You just had to put it in there and see how it was cooking all the time. You had to check it all the
I
time.
had to watch it all the time.
Okay.
But now I raised the kids, all the kids that way, till I moved in Ohio here.
And when you had that kind of stove, how did you cook? I mean, what'd you cook? What'd you cook to eat that night normally?
I'd cook beans and potatoes and stuff like that. Maybe some nights we'd have macaroni and tomatoes. And I'd go out and pick wild greens after the greens come up. And we just had a good time back there, and I cooked.
Now, you started having babies. You had Helen.
Well, we lived in 2 rooms, the Preacher Mullett's house, up over top of them, upstairs. We moved out 11 days before Shelby Jean was born, and moved in a 2-room log house up in the holler.
So you actually moved out of the one cabin, moved back in with when you had
Helen.
after you had Helen. Now, what'd you do? Why was the reason for that? Because it was more room.
Yeah, and see, I moved out of the first house because the doctor wouldn't go back on that hill where we lived. And I had to come off on that hill to...
Now, did you have any trouble with having Helen? Was it easy birth?
No. The doctor said, been 30 minutes later, he wouldn't have saved either one of us.
Well, when you say that, another thing is people you used to hospitals. How did you go about when you had to start having contractions, had pains? Where'd you go? What happened?
I had them home.
You had Helen right in the house.
Right at home.
Did the doctor come in there, or did you have a midwife?
No, I had a midwife and a doctor.
Okay, now midwife, who was that? Somebody in the town?
Granny Harris, old Grandma Harris, she was a midwife. And she come to my house and she couldn't do anything. So Simon got a doctor. And he delivered Helen at home. Well, Jean and Nervy Jane always delivered at home.
So the first, how many kids was delivered in the house?
Let's see, there's Helen, Jean, Nerve, Robert Lee, and James, and Fred and Dave.
Then you started having them in the hospital?
Hospital. And Mary, she was born in the hospital.
You know, when you started off, you didn't know how many kids you were going to have. You didn't plan. You didn't say, well, I'm going to have 5 kids.
No, I didn't. I had such time when Helen was born, I didn't want any more, because I thought, I'd have to go through that all the time. I didn't want any more. So then when I got that way with Jean, I said, well, this'll be the last one. A lot of times I think, well, I'll just pack up and leave and not have no more. But I stuck it out till I had 16 of them. And I had 2 babies to die. One was younger than Nervy Jane, between Nervy and Bob. And there was one...
Did they die at birth? Stillborn?
No, she lived 7 days. I had 4 girls, 4 had our boy. Robert was our oldest boy.
Well, the babies, the ones that lived 7 days,
Was premature.
Oh, okay.
And back in days, there's no way you could save a premature heart. And so she died at 7 days after she was born. And then Robert Lee, now he was born up in the head of a holler up Mommy's. And so I had known between James and Robert Lee, and he died. He was premature too, and he died. He died the same day he was born, but he was alive when he was born, but he died the same day.
How, when you say premature, was it a month or?
Well, yeah, there's about 7 months. It's 7 months baby.
So they probably didn't weigh less than 5 pounds?
Well, she weighed about 4 pounds and a half, I think, somebody told me. And he was weighed about the same. They was about the same when they died.
Yeah, all the kids were breastfed?
Huh?
All the kids were breastfed?
All of them.
No milk. It was all coming from mama.
It was wait till they was good-sized babies, big enough to hold their own bottles.
Now, how about your brothers and sisters? What did they have for kids? Does any of them have a family as big as yours?
Yeah, John has, and Ethel had 15, my oldest sister.
How many kids did John have?
John had 15.
But how about births? Did they have, because you had 16 births. Well, you only had 15 births because you had twins.
Mm-hmm.
So you had 15 births. And they had 15 births, so did they have some that died?
My oldest sister had triplets,
Oh, she had triplets.
and they died at birth.
Now, did her triplets she had, were they,
Premature.
I mean, were they, what do you call them? Did they look alike or they were different?
Yeah, all 3 of them was boys, and you couldn't tell one from the other.
All right, so they were actually a triplet, one egg that separated
Yeah.
instead of having, like you had Jackie and Jack, and they were separate births or separate. They weren't identical. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
They weren't identical. So the
Well,
triplets
hers
he had
was
was identical.
identical.
So, because that kind of runs in the family, people, that you never really had any identity. Your twins were not identical.
Mm-mm.
It was just a matter.
My grandmother, she was a twin, and she had twins,
That's right.
and so his wife had twins.
But there hasn't been any other identical twins in the family.
Mm-mm. And John's got 3 sets of twins. He's got 2 sets, was a boy and a girl, just like mine. And he had 1 set
But John
girls.
doesn't count because his wife isn't related.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't use
But
them.
they don't look alike.
Yeah. Well, then they're not identical.
Mm-hmm.
Different ways. So the reason I say that from a history standpoint gives you people an idea. Okay, how about when you had to start having all these kids? I mean, every year then, your life was made up of having babies.
Taking care of the kids.
Now, when did you start getting help out of the kids?
Well, Helen and them would help me. They started when they was about, I guess about 8 years old. They'd do the dishes at times and pick up things.
Now, how long did Helen stay in school?
But she went to the 8th grade, I think. 7th or 8th. And she quit school when she was about 15 when she quit.
Who was the first one to graduate?
Jacqueline was the first to graduate from high school. James has got his diploma, but he made it, when he was in service.
Most of the reason the kids quit was because of going to work or helping out.
They could have all went to school and graduated. Simon was working in the mines, but we had to buy books for him, high school books. And they just quit. Wouldn't go on. They had a good chance. They could have went on to school. Jean and Nervy Jane, they got the 7th, 8th grade. And Bob, he got the 8th grade. And he could have went home, but he wouldn't do it.
Okay, let's go to some of the houses you first had after you moved out of the Mullets, out of the upstairs. You moved into a house. How long were you there? Where town was that in?
That was in Goodman. We lived right around Goodman
It was West Virginia.
till We moved, James was 5 weeks old. We
Yeah.
moved to Kentucky.
Where did Simon work there? He was working the mines then?
He worked in the mines. He worked at a broom handle factory, making broom handles. When World War II broke out, he went making tent stubs. You know, these things put tents in. They went to making that when the war broke out. We made broom handles up till then. So then after the war broke out, he went to mining. In mines then. And he worked in mines till the mine shut down. He couldn't get no
Or what house there were you in that one?
We had lived there in Aflax. We bought a house there in Aflax. And after he got cut off, we lost the house. We didn't have it paid for and couldn't pay for it. We had a big family and we couldn't pay for the house. We lost it.
Okay, then where did you go from there?
We went to Toller. We stayed about 6 months up in Toller, Kentucky. We left there and we moved to Lucasville.
Okay, when you were in Toller, who did you stay with somebody? Or?
No, we rented a house off an old guy.
How many kids did you have then?
We had, from Murray on down, let's see, we had about 8, 9 at home.
So you stayed there for 6 months and then you went to Lucasville?
We moved to Lucasville. Jean, she had went to Columbus and she met Willard. And her and Willard got married. And we moved in to Lucasville in his house. We stayed down there till we bought our home that we live in now.
So you were staying in Lucasville in Willard's,
Mm-hmm.
one of his houses that he had?
Yeah.
And how long were you there in Lucasville?
We lived there about 2 years.
2 years.
And Simon went to work in Columbus at a Ford Motor. It was tractor parts, but it's called Ford Motor. And he worked there for a long time. He was there working there when we moved to Jasper. And we bought that house and moved in it. He was working in Columbus.
I know when you had these houses in Lucasville and down in Kentucky, none of those had water,
Yeah,
indoor plumbing.
nothing but water.
You had water coming into the sink in the kitchen. That was all you had. How about heat, electric heat?
No, we burnt coal in the fireplaces. They had fireplaces and we burnt coal.
Same way in Lucasville, same way.
No, in Lucasville we had a heater, coal heater. We burned wood or coal either
But you
one.
didn't have electricity.
Yeah, we did when we lived in Lucasville.
Okay, but you didn't have a furnace. You had the coal furnace.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you had water. The water was just.
No,
you didn't have water.
In the winter time we had water down there in Lucasville. In the summertime we hauled water from over in Lucasville.
Why was that?
Because the water would dry up in there and it was so salty you couldn't use it.
So but now the water wasn't warm. You didn't have a water heater. You had to heat all the water.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to take a bath, somebody want to take a bath,
We heated on the stove.
heat the water on the stove and bathe people that way. And except in the summer, they go down to bath. Did anybody like go in the summertime bath in the creek or anything like that?
No, mine never. I was bathing in the house.
Okay, you always bathed in the house. But the same thing as far as what you explained before, as far as cooking, you still had to do the same thing. You had to heat all your water.
Mm-hmm.
All the food was done with the kind of stove you had was in
Well,
Lucasville.
we moved down at Lucasville. We had gas cook stove, but it was bottle gas, and I cooked on it. Well, after I moved to Jasper, I still cooked on gas till just a few years ago when we went and switched over to electric.
When you worked in, or when you moved to Jasper, when you first moved there, did you have indoor plumbing then?
Yeah.
if that was the first time, when did you move to Jess? What year was that, you remember?
64.
64. So 1964 was the first time you really had indoor plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
Up until that, you never had.
Never had no bathroom.
So that was a big luxury item, right?
Yeah, and now I wasn't about to let it go.
So now, what about hot water? Do you have hot water?
We didn't have hot water when we moved to Jasper. We had to buy some hot water heater. We didn't get that till 3 or 4 years after we moved down there.
How about washing clothes? How did you wash clothes?
Up till, let's see, before David was born, I washed on washboard. And
How'd you do that? When you say you washed on washboard, what'd you have to do?
Had water in a wash tub and put them clothes in a washboard and rub them up and down on that washboard till you got the dirt out.
Okay, so that washboard, what'd that look like?
Well, it's made out of wood frame, and the metal part inside is what you rub, and it's in a wooden frame. I got one hanging down on the wall. I'll show you when you come down again.
Well, no, I know what it is. I mean, I'm just doing it for anybody else that ever listens to this. Remember, you're going to have great grandchildren that will listen to this someday.
But I raised my youngins.
So when you washed on that washboard, you basically ran it up and down the washboard with soap on it.
Yeah. Use lye or soap powder, and rub it on that washboard till it got clean.
So the soap. And what did you do then? You put it in a rinse bowl in?
Have me a tub of water and boil them clothes, and had to hang them on the clothesline.
When did you get a wash machine? Did you ever get an old Ringer wash machine?
Yeah, let's see. I had that. I got one just before Fred was born.
Well, Ringer wash machine, what was that?
It was a round wash machine with the wringer set up on top of it. And stick clothes in there and then go wring them out. And wring all the water out.
The machine actually, where you put the clothes in the bowl or the bucket, did you have to wash them in there by hand?
No,
it turned. Okay.
It's like a automatic wash.
It was electric.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then when you got to that kind of a wash machine, when did you get a wash machine that actually spun dry too? You know.
Well, I never had an automatic washer until I lived there in Jasper.
When was that? What year do you think that was?
I forget now. I had one just before Jacqueline got married, and then she went and bought me one.
And did you ever have one? When did you get a dryer?
When she went and got it for me.
Okay, so Jackie bought you a dryer. Would have been about 1970.
About a year before she got married.
Okay, 71. Then prior to that, then you would hang clothes outside.
Yeah.
What about in the winter?
Oh Lord, I hung them out on the porch and around till big freezes. I hung them on the lines.
And what about when it was really cold and it was freezing? How did you do it then? Did you have to bring them inside?
Mm-hmm.
Hang them up inside?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hang them around walls and things.
When's the first time now when you got around back in the days, you used to, if you went from one place to the other, you had to go by horse.
Yeah. When I was a girl, we lived on farms. And we had horses. And we'd have to, if we went to the store, we had to get us a horse and go that way.
So then he also had wagons too, the horses.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes,
Yeah.
did your dad get a wagon up and get you all together in that?
Yeah. And if we moved, we'd move in a wagon. The last load of furniture he'd take out, he'd put us in the wagon and take us with it.
Do you remember the first time you got in the car?
Yeah, I was about, I was about 6 years old.
That was the first time you got in the car. Now, who was that, your dad's car?
No, there's an old gray-headed man lived down below us. His name was Jim Suggs. And he had a car. and Ethel was dating his stepson. So if I went out, if she went out with him in the car, I'd have to go with her. And I was about 6 years old. And
When's the first time your dad ever have a car?
he had a car, but I never went nowhere in it. He never drove a car. Never did drive one. And but he had a car.
So what about Simon? When did he get a car?
His first car was about 1947.
So you've been married 13 years before you had a car.
Mm-hmm.
Now how did you guys get away? Did you have a horse?
We walked or get somebody to take us.
So you didn't really have a horse.
No,
Did you have any animals, or did you have
we
goats
had
or
cows.
chickens?
Me and Simon, we had cows. We had a cow when Jean was born. Or no, just after Jean was born. We had a cow. We kept her for a long time. And then after we moved to Aflax, we had another one. We kept her for a long time. And I got tired of fooling with her and sold her. And I sold her Simon's brother-in-law.
So Simon didn't have a car until 1947.
It's about 1947.
After the war, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then when he got a car, then you finally rode in cars a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever ride in a train?
Yeah.
And when you
When we lived there in Goodman, if we wanted to go to Williamson, we'd go over the train, passenger train, would stop there in Goodman, and we'd go over and ride the train to Williamson, and catch a train and come back.
those trains, were those the old coal burning trains?
Yeah.
You know, they put out the old smoke and dust and
Yeah.
little pollutant trains.
Yeah.
Really. How far was it to go when you rode that train? How far a ride was that?
Well, we'd go about 4 miles, but it was easier than walking or hiring somebody to take us.
Well, how much did it cost to ride that train in 4 miles?
And it didn't cost, I don't think, a quarter an hour. More than a quarter, no way. And then they put a bus on the road. And you could ride that bus from Goodman to Williamson for a dime. And catch that bus and come back for a dime.
How about an airplane?
Oh, I never was close to one.
Don't want to get one in one.
No, I don't think I want to ride one.
No airplanes.
Uh-huh.
How about first time? Can you remember seeing an airplane fly over your head?
Yeah, I was real small. I don't remember how old I was, but I was real small when one went over. And Mom, we jumped up and down and hollered, "What is that thing?" And Mom had to tell us what it was. And like scared us to death. It's going over low, and like scared us to death. But that's been years ago. Let's see. Yeah, in fact, it's been about 70 years ago. Because Darlene she was about a baby, and she'll be 71 in May. And she was a baby at that time. I know Mama laughed, and she said we didn't know what things was.
Okay. I don't.